Hey, everybody! It is I, Mr. Aaron, returning once again for another installment of Stanley in Space. So you may remember, we left off yesterday. The lamb chops were hearing from President Ott, the itty-bitty little president of the itty-bitty little race of Tyrans on planet Tira, about the natural disaster that occurred there. So, we'll pick right back up. When the rain stopped, there was no green, none, just brown. Worse, Epps' test proved that our water was undrinkable, and that nowhere on Tira would anything grow. I broadcast at once to the nation, "Do not despair," I said. "Tira will soon recover." "Oh, good," Mr. Lambchop said. President Ott shook his head. "I lied. I couldn't tell the truth for fear of causing a panic, you see. The test showed that it would be a year, at least, before Tira was green again, and long before that we will have emptied our last tin, our last bottle of Fazzola." He sat down again, covering his face with his hands. "So then, we sent a message into space. Lure some other planet's spaceship, we thought. Hold it for ransom, you see. Make them send food and water. Oh, shameful, underhanded. You will never forgive us, I know." His voice trailed away, and there was only the patter of the rain. Close to tears, the lamb chops looked at each other, then at the little people on the tabletop. The Tyrans seemed particularly tiny now, and brave, and nice. "You poor dears," Mrs. Lambchop said. "There was no need to conquer us. We would help you willingly if we could." The Tyrans seemed at first unable to believe their ears. Then, suddenly, their faces shone with joy. "Bless you!" cried General App. "Saved!" Mrs. Ott clapped her hands. "We are saved!" "Saved?" said Mrs. Lambchop. "Of course," said President Ott. "Don't you see? Earth's spaceships can bring food and water till—" "Oh, what's wrong?" It was Arthur who explained. "I'm very sorry," he said, "but there's just the Star Scout. Earth hasn't got any other spaceships, and it would take years to build them." The Tyrans gasped. "Years?" said Dr. Epp. Stanley felt so sad he could hardly speak. "And it's no use going for food in the Star Scout," he said. "By the time we return from Earth, you'd all be, well, you know—" "Dead," said Mrs. Ott. In the Star Scout, a terrible silence fell. The facts were clear. The cupboards of Tira would soon be empty, and then all its tiny people would starve to death. Chapter 8. Stanley's Good Idea. The teapot was cold now, and a last cookie crumb lay unwanted on a plate. Gloom hung like a dark cloud within the Star Scout. "It's not fair," Arthur said for the third time. "It's just not." "Stop saying that," Stanley told him. "That's 4 times now." 5, said Dr. Epp. General App tried to be cheerful. "Ah, well, still some tinned meat, eh? Plenty of grape Fazzola. Much to be thankful for." "I will never be thankful for grape Fazzola," said Mrs. Ott. "It's just that—" Arthur sighed. "I mean, Earth has so much food. Millions of people, and there's mostly still enough." The Tyrans seemed amazed. "Millions? You're joking," said President Ott. "Ha ha," said General App. "Dreadful crush, I should think. Millions?" Mrs. Lambchop smiled. "With all of our great nations, many millions. And still the numbers grow." "Well, Here, too, President Ott shook his head. Youthful marriages, babies, one after another. But millions? Our population, well, there's just Tiraville, of course, it's 683. 84, said Mrs. Ott. Miss Ix had a baby last night. Now it was the lamb chops who were amazed. Just Tiraville? Arthur cried. But Tiraville's your capital, you said. Well, it would have to be, wouldn't it, dear? Said Mrs. Ott. Stanley shook his head. On the whole planet? Only 684 Tirans? Gosh, I'll bet... Wait! An idea had come to him. Stanley had had exciting ideas before, but none that excited him as this one did. Mrs. Ott, he shouted, how much do you weigh? Stanley, said Mrs. Lambchop. Mrs. Ott was not offended. Actually, I've slimmed a bit, though sadly not in the hips. I'm 6 ounces, young man. Why do you ask? The words rushed out of Stanley. Because if you're average, only children would be even lighter, then all of the Tirans together would weigh... Okay, let me figure this out. Less than 300 pounds, said Mr. Lambchop, who was good at math. Though I don't see... Then he did see. Oh, good for you, Stanley. The lad's bright, we know, said General App, but what? General, said Mr. Lambchop, summon all Tirans here to the Star Scout. Fetch what remains of your tin food and grape fazzola. Perhaps Earth can be your new home until Tira is green again. Chapter 9. The Weighing. From each little house, on each little street, the Tirans came. Every man, woman, and child, even Captain Ick with a guard from the jail. The rain had stopped, and the evening light shone gold on the brown field in which the tiny people stood assembled. President Ott addressed them. Fellow Tirans, I must confess that your government has deceived you. The truth is, it will be at least a year before our fields and streams are fit again. Cries rose from the crowd. We were lied to! Lordy, talk about bad news! We'll starve! Shoot all the darn gun scientists! Wait, shouted President Ott. We are offered refuge on Earth, if the voyage is possible. Pay attention, please! Stepping forward, Mr. Lambchop read aloud from the booklet that had come with the Star Scout. Your spacecraft has been designed for safety as well as comfort. Use only as directed. He raised his voice. By bringing souvenirs aboard or by inviting friends to ride with you. Cries rose again. Oh, that did it. We're not souvenirs. We said no friends either, stupid. Oh, we've had it, looks like. Mr. Lambchop raised his hand. There is still hope, but you must all be weighed. Also, the supplies you would require for the trip. The Star Scout's bathroom scales, set down in the field, proved too high for the Tirans, and the weighing was briefly delayed until Arthur, using the Monopoly board, made a ramp by which they could easily mount. General App barked orders. Right then, groups of 20 to 25, families together, don't jiggle. The Otts and 6 other families marched up onto the scale, beside which Mrs. Lambchop stood with a pad and pencil. 7 1/4 pounds, she said, writing it down. Next! Shouted General App, but the Ott group was already starting down and another marching up. Group after group mounted the scale. There was jiggling due to excited children, but Mrs. Lambchop took care to wait until the needle was still. Within an hour, the entire population of Tira had been weighed, along with its supplies of tinned food and fazzola, and she added up. Tirans, 239, she announced. Food and fazzola, 140. Total, 379 pounds. Are we saved? Or are we too fat? Came a cry. Too soon to tell. Oh, wrong voice, sorry. Too soon to tell, Mr. Lambchop called back. We must see how much we can lighten our ship. A good start was made by discarding the Star Scouts' dining room table and one steel bunk, since Stanley and Arthur could easily share. Then out went Stanley's tennis balls, extra sweater, and his chief pilot zip jacket with the American flag. Out went Arthur's knee socks, raincoat, and a plastic gorilla that he had smuggled aboard. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop added their extra clothing, lamps, kitchenware, the Monopoly game, and, at last, the posters of Mexico and France. The crowd stood hushed as the pile was weighed. Somewhere a baby cried, and its parents scolded it. £377, Mrs. Lambchop announced. "Oh, dear," she whispered to President Ott. "Two less than we need." "I see." President Ott, after a moment's thought, climbed up onto the scale. "Good news, Tyrans," he called. "Almost all of us are saved." Cheers went up, and then someone shouted, "What do you mean, almost all?" "We weigh, as a nation, a bit too much," President Ott explained. "But only 4, if largish need stay behind. I shall be one. Will 3 more volunteer?" Murmurs rose from the crowd. "Now that's my kind of president." "Hey, leave Ick behind." "How about you, Ralph?" "Oh, ask somebody else, darn ya." The matter was quickly resolved. "I won't go without you, dear," Mrs. Ott told her husband, and Captain Ick, hoping to regain popularity, announced that he, too, would remain. General App was the 4th volunteer. "Just an old soldier, ma'am," he told Mrs. Lambchop. "Lived a full life. Now time to just fade away to—" "Hey, wait!" Arthur was pointing to the scale. "We forgot about that! We can leave the scale behind! Now nobody has to stay!" Chapter 10. Heading Home. "Mr. and Mrs. Ix and the new baby," said President Ott beside his wife on a ledge above the magnifying window. "Ah, yes, on the fridge." The people of Tira were being made as comfortable as possible in the various nooks and crannies of the Star Scout. Stanley and Arthur had cleared a cupboard where Tira high school students could study during the trip, and Mrs. Lambchop had cut up sheets to make hundreds of little blankets and put out bits of cotton for pillows. Excuse me. Oh, my allergies are getting to me today. "Makeshift, Mrs. Ix," she said now, settling the X's on the fridge. "But such short notice. Back a bit from the edge, yes?" "Short notice indeed," said Mrs. Ix. "So many—" "Not to worry," Mrs. Lambchop smiled proudly. "My son, the chief pilot, will call ahead." From a nearby shelf, Captain Ick whispered an apology for attempting to paralyze Arthur. "Between you and I didn't really think it would work," he said. "Between you and me," said Mrs. Lambchop. "But thank you, Captain Ick." She turned to Stanley. "We're all ready, dear." Stanley checked his controls. "Let's go!" "Tyrans!" President Ott called for their attention. "Our national anthem!" Everywhere in the Star Scout, Tyrans rose, their right hands over their hearts. Hummed Mrs. Ott, setting a key, and they began to sing. "Tira the lovely, Tira the free, here, dear planet, our promise to thee. Where'er we may go, where'er we may roam, we'll come back to Tira, Tira our home." The words echoed in the softly lit cabin. Many Tyrans were weeping, and the eyes of the Lambchops as they took their seats glistened too. "Be it ever so humble, there's no planet so dear. We will always love Tira from far or from—" Stanley pressed the start button, and the Star Scouts' rockets roared to life. The singing stopped suddenly, and Mrs. Ix cried out from the fridge, "Oh, my! Is this thing safe?" "Yes, indeed," Mrs. Lambchop called back. "Perhaps," said Mrs. Ick, "but it is my belief that if Tyrans were meant to fly, we'd have wings." The Star Scout lifted now, gaining speed as it rose. Its mission was done. The strangers who had called from a distant planet were no longer strangers, but friends. It was all very satisfactory, Stanley thought. The other Lambchops thought so too. And there they are singing. Chapter 11. Earth Again. "Real pleasure to welcome you, Tyrans," said the President, almost done with his speech. "I wish you a fine year on Earth." Before him on the White House lawn, with newspaper and TV reporters all about, sat the Lambchops, and, in a tiny grandstand built especially for the occasion, the people of Tira. The Tyrans were now applauding politely, but they looked nervous. And Mrs. Lambchop guessed why. That crowd at the Space Center for the Star Scouts landing, the drive through crowded streets into Washington, D.C. Poor Tyrans. Everywhere they looked, giant buildings, giant people. How could they feel comfortable here? But a surprise was in store. Across the lawn a great white sheet had been spread. Now, at the President's signal, workmen pulled the sheet away. "Welcome," said the President, "to Tiraville 2. Gasps rose from the Tyrans, and then shouts of joy. Before them, on what had been the White House tennis court, lay an entire village of tiny houses, one for each Tyran family, with shops and schools and churches and a miniature railway serving all principal streets. Begun when Stanley had called ahead from space, Tiraville 2 had been completed well before the Star Scouts' arrival, thanks to rush deliveries from leading toy stores in Washington and New York. The excited Tyrans ran from the grandstand to explore their new homes, and soon happy voices rose from every window and doorway of Tiraville 2. "Nice furniture! Hooray! Fresh lemonade, no more Fazzola! Oh, in the cupboards, see, shirts, dresses, suits, underwear even!" The Otts, General App, Dr. Epp, and Captain Ick came back to say goodbye, and the Lambchops knelt to touch fingertips in farewell. The TV men filmed this, and Arthur made everyone laugh, pretending to be paralyzed by the touch of Captain Ick. Then the newsmen left. The Tyrans returned to Tiraville 2, and only the President remained with the Lambchops on the White House lawn. "Oh, well, back to work," the President sighed. "Goodbye, Lambchops. You're all heroes, you know. Save the nation." "Not really," Stanley said. "They couldn't have conquered us." "Well, you know what I mean," the President said. "You folks care to stay for supper?" "Thank you, no," Mrs. Lambchop said. "It is quite late, and this has been an exciting but very tiring day." It was bedtime when they got home. Stanley and Arthur had a light supper with hot chocolate to help them sleep, after which Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked them in and said good night. The brothers lay quietly in the darkness for a moment. Then Arthur chuckled. "The Magno-Titanic paralyzer was sort of scary," he said. "You were brave, Stanley, protecting me." "Oh, that's okay," Stanley said. "You're my brother, right?" "I know." Arthur was sleepy now. "Stanley, when the Tyrans go back, will their land and water will be okay? Will they let us know?" "I guess so." Stanley was drowsy, too. "Oh, good night, Arthur." "Good night," Arthur said. And soon they were both asleep. And in time, from the great farness of space, but a farness no longer strange or unknown, another message came. We are home. All is well. And again, we are home. Thank you, Earth. All is well. Well, that is just a pretty darn cool story, isn't it? We managed to save an entire planet full of people, which is pretty darn cool. Good job, Stanley. Stanley in space. All right, guys, so of course, don't forget to check out our other live programs. There's Toddler Time with Miss Becky. There's Stories with Sunny with Miss Sunny. And there's also, what is it called? Creating with Constance? I think that's what it's called. Anyway, there's that one as well. So be sure to check those out. And remember, of course, that we have all of our digital materials available for you through Hoopla and RB Digital and Overdrive and all of those cool things. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you later.